Thank you, Bass. I appreciate that. That was Sebastian Messer playing live for us here on WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. And I am your host, Adam Messer. This is the Adam Messer Show, where I talk with authors and artists and entertainers. And my special guest today is Ron Fortier. He is a comics and pulp fiction writer, also an editor and a publisher. And Ron, this first hour we've been talking a lot about how you got into comics and your love of comics and your newest project. And so it sounds like you have a lot going on. Before the end of the last hour, you were saying to ask you about the daughter of Dracula.
Right, exactly.
So tell me about that, because I have a little backstory about Dracula myself that I want to share with you. But I want to hear this story about the daughter of
All
Dracula.
right. So this is how this works. Um, I'm a huge fan of the old Universal horror monsters, the classics. Bela Lugosi is Dracula, and
Right.
Lon Chaney is the Wolfman, whatever. But years ago, I think when I was a kid watching a teenager watching those ghoulish horror shows, on midnight shows on television, they ran a thing called was it Dracula's Daughter? All right, which was the actual sequel to the Bela Lugosi Dracula. And very, very few people know about it, except diehard monster fans and fanatics or whatever. But apparently, when they had made Dracula with Lugosi, it was so popular that Universal naturally wanted to do a sequel, and they'd have figured a way to bring back, the Count and whatever. But Lugosi balked; he didn't want to do Dracula anymore, and so, not wanting to let this thing go, eventually an innovative writer at Universal at the time said, well, why don't we have, like a son or daughter kind of film? And they whipped up this script called Daughter of Dracula, which actually takes place exactly where Dracula leaves off. And the star was one of their character players, a young woman named Gloria Holden, who was a brunette, very, very distinct, haunting look face. She was perfect for the role. And so I catch this on late night, TV as a teenager. I was mesmerized by it. Some people think it's an even better film than the original Dracula, which, hey, people fall on both sides of that camp. But over the years, since I picked up videotapes of Daughter Dracula, I got it on DVD, and always wanted to do something with that character, Meyer von Dracula. And what inspired me ultimately was I went to see that Brandon Fraser remake of the Mummy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I came out of the theater going, well, there's a mashup for you: Indiana Jones meets the Mummy.
Mm-hmm.
All right, which is pretty much what that movie was. And so I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. If they could mash up the Mummy, who would I put Dracula's daughter? And then it hit me like a ton of bricks, because one of my passions and love is aviation history.
Okay.
All right, and I have been fascinated by the early World War I aces, the fighter pilots from World War I that went up in those bales of wire and plywood and paper mache planes with machine guns on them, including perhaps the most notable and notorious of them all, Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron. So I'm wondering, gee, what would happen if just prior to World War I, the Red Baron meets Dracula's daughter? And she becomes enamored of him. And so the war begins. She reads about his exploits. She can't get him out of her mind. She travels from Transylvania to Berlin after he's won the coveted Blue Ace, and she seduces him. And then begins, eventually he learns that she's one of the undead, and they're going to share eternity together because she's going to give him the vampire's kiss. But before that can actually happen, history takes its course, and he's actually shot down and killed. All right. She goes ballistic because she's now lost the love of her life, and using all her vampiric powers, begins to attack the Allied forces by sending armies of rats to attack their hangars, or squadrons of bats to tear down their planes in the sky, et cetera, and all of which leads to a rather unique ending to the story, Adam, which I'm not going to reveal here.
Please don't let people read it.
We don't want to do that. All right. Okay. So without even a thought of who could draw this or where it could get published, I, over a period of a month, sat down and wrote a 108-page graphic novel based on that plot called, The Daughter of Dracula. All right. So one night I'm surfing the internet, and up pops Rob Davis's name. Now, Rob, like myself, had entered the comic field back in the early 80s and was a well-known artist. He'd worked for a lot of the smaller companies like Malibu and Eternity until he eventually got to work at DC Comics doing their Star Trek comics. And he and I had met at conventions, and we'd hit it off. And sadly, we'd never done anything together. So here I am. I find this web strip online called The Spirit of 66 by Rob Davis. And I pull it up, and sure enough, it's a weekly comic strip about two guys driving down Route 66, like the old TV show. And Rob's writing and illustrating it. Well, I was taken with it. I saw his email. I wrote him. And next thing you know, we're, communicating via email after like maybe 20 years, the last time we'd been in touch with each other. And at one point, Rob said, "So what are you doing, creatively, Ron?" And I said to him, "Well, you ain't going to believe this, but I've got this 108-page graphic novel called Daughter of Dracula." So Rob goes, "Well, if it's digital, send me a copy. I'd like to read it." Sure enough, I sent Rob a copy of Daughter of Dracula. A few days later, he writes back and says, "This is a lot of fun. I really like this a lot. This is really well done." But he says, "I'd love to do it for you, but I'm out of the comic business right now. I'm driving a bus and, to pay the bills and take care of my family. And if I were to take this on, the best I could do would be to give you one page a week." Well, Adam, this script had been sitting in my files for over a year by then.
Oh, wow.
And here's one of the finest artists I know in the business telling me he's going to write, he's going to pencil, ink, and letter my entire 108 pages, all right, as a partnership with me. And I surprised the heck out of him when I come back and said, 1 page a week will be fine. And so for the next 2 years, Rob Davis delivered 1 page a week.
Wow, that's incredible.
All right, that's what a professional is. And so now we're done. 2 years go by, and he turns in the last page. I mean, I'm so happy I can cry. This book is beautiful. Well, we put together a presentation package with an outline, 5 or 6 finished pages, and we start sending it around to all the known publishers. And nobody wanted it. Nobody. Rob's beside himself, all right? More so than I was, all right? Eventually, he calls me one day and says, "You know what? We don't need them." He says, "We're going to self-publish this." I said, "For real?" He says, "For real, totally." He said, "I'm going to figure out how to do this. I'm going to learn the skills of on-demand, desktop for printing, publishing." And he did. And the next thing you know, we go to Amazon, and there's their Create Space operations, and we published Daughter of Dracula on our own. That was 15 years ago, Adam. Every time we go to conventions, we order another 30, 40, 50 copies, and we sell out all the time.
Well, that's great.
And that, again, the point here is the story is that anybody can do this. We're no longer, at the beck and call of editors or publishers who may not understand what it is we're doing, or there was an old thing about when I was in the heyday of the 80s boom, that the publishers would say, "Oh, give us something new, give us something new." And it ended up being a joke, because every time you gave them anything fresh or exciting, they were afraid of it. They didn't know how to market it. They didn't know how to sell it. And it was, okay, well, we're sorry, but that's too new. Go figure that one out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So once Rob had self-published Daughter of Dracula for us under the imprint that he created called Redbud Studio, that's when the light bulb went off and said, you know what, we can do our own comics. So it's a case where we can't send them through the regular distribution channels like Diamond, because they would want way too much money and we couldn't ever make a profit. But there's nothing that stops us from printing whatever amounts we want. We don't have to carry an inventory. We only have them printed when we're going to conventions. And again, like I said, 15 years now, I would hazard to guess that maybe we've sold 1,000 copies of Daughter of Dracula all over the country.
I when you're talking there, I pulled up the Redbud Studios webpage.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and man, this is some fantastic artwork.
Well, thanks. All right. Yeah, I kind of, once we had done Mr. Jigsaw, I went back to Rob and I told him, I said, well, you did a lot of stuff for, Malibu and Eternity. Is any of that, privately owned? Was it, creator owned? And Rob said, sure. I said, well, contact those writers. Well, you should be reprinting that as well. And so we did a series he did for Eternity, I believe, was a female, the daughter of Robin Hood. It was called Robin, Robyn. All right. And he did like three or four issues of that with a gentleman named Paul Story. And he got a hold of Paul, and and we put that together as a graphic novel, and he sells that through Redbud.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. When I was telling you last hour, actually, let me do the studio ID. Everybody, you're listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. So last hour when we were talking about how we met Bobby, I told you I met a guy named Randy Bishop here in Savannah at GnomeCon. And with that, Randy has his book called Hawk of New York. So he independently published it, is his own original character and, his own book or whatever. And I met him like the first time that he'd ever gone to any convention or anything like that, and was, showing his book off and whatever. So I got to buy like the first book from him, and I don't know that I was the first person to buy one of the books, but I was one of the first people to buy one of the books,
Right.
And so he did the cover, the little blank cover, which was, I guess starting to get popular then, where the artist would do like the blank cover and they would draw it in or whatever. And so he did these little pictures of a hawk. And the thing about it is, like, when we were talking last hour, like you always had this dream to write comics. I always used to like to write, but as a kid, I used to want to draw, I used to want to, do that kind of thing. So I started learning how to draw, grade school and that kind of thing. And then as an adult, really, after high school, I didn't do a whole lot of it until I got into my early 30s and I started drawing again. But, yeah, it's interesting because, I kind of circling back around with the comic book thing, but I want to kind of go a little off tangent here. Vampires. So I wrote, I've got a series called the Savannah Vampire Novel Series, Ron, and it's called Blood Thrasher. And the first novella is called Blood Thrasher, The Devils in the Metal. It's set here in 1989 in Savannah, Georgia, and it's about like a heavy metal vampire band. And then the second book goes into, it's called Vinyl All Night. So it's longer. The first book's like only 10,000 words, a little short novella. The second book is more of a novel. It's actually, it's about 50,000 words. So it's not a super long novel, but it's not as short as the first one. And so I've always liked vampire lore. And so kind of going back to the Dracula thing, maybe a year and a half. Man, I think it was last year at the Savannah Book Festival. My friend Ryan Dunn posts this thing saying that Bram Stoker's great grandnephew is going to be down here, Dacre Stoker.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and I think I might be messing his name up. I think it's Dacker or Dacre. I always get it messed up. I always get it twisted. But anyway, so he's down here and this guy has written a follow-up. It's like a prequel book called Dracula with J.D. Barker. And so, and it's in first person. It's not necessarily epistolary, but it's more of a like first person narrative type. So it's very similar, but in Dracula it's epistolary, and you get all the different like diary or
Right.
letter style
Yeah.
or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Not explaining it for you, just for the audience. So I had to go meet him. I was like, oh gosh, I gotta go meet this guy. I've always loved Dracula, So he had a little talk downtown at the I think it was a Jepson Center. Anyway, so I get there and I'm running late. Well, it just so happens that the meeting that they're doing for the talk is running late as well. So I get there on time, and we sit through. I'm sitting next to my buddy Ryan, and we're sitting through, and then we go and we pick up the book. We get in the line to get the autograph or whatever, and then get to talk to him or whatever, and then. One of the things as a person, I doing interviews as a journalist and things like that, and also with the radio show here, I like to talk with folks, about their creative endeavors. So I asked him if he would be on my radio show. So he was on the radio show. So he is actually going to be back on May, right before Dracula Day. So in a couple of weeks, he's actually going to be back on the show. And so that I thought that was such a cool little side trivia or whatever, but I've always been fascinated with like those old school monster stories, the vampire stories, Frankenstein, the Mummy, the werewolves, and all that kind of stuff. I loved 80s horror. I like the old black and white 50s stuff. I liked Alfred Hitchcock stuff or whatever. So kind of circling back around to the comic book thing, I never really read a whole lot of anything besides like superhero type comics. I didn't read horror or any of that kind of stuff. I read mostly like X-Men and Spider-Man, Hulk, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, sure.
And but when I met Randy, and then I also met a couple of other indie authors, I was like, okay, I like to draw. I like to write. Maybe I can start, figuring out how to do this. So I started, learning about it, and this going back into the publishing side of things. So I put this first book out, and then I've learned a lot about, the process and, how to be more disciplined with writing as a career. I'm not making money off of it yet, but that's one of my goals. But one of the things is that, learning as you go, and, I'm actually taking a course right now on publishing from a well-known publisher, well-known author. And I'm very leery of, like I said, about the shovels and jeans, right? I'm very leery of those kind of folks because there's so many people out there that, they'll try to, sell you something with smoke and mirrors. And then you're like, well, gosh, why am I not, I've did everything in the formula, so, but I'm taking a course right now and I'm learning so much, and then like personally, one of my goals was to actually write and illustrate a graphic novel. It's like a Viking fantasy type lore. And the weird thing about it though, Ron, is that I have so many different areas that I like, that I like sci-fi, I like fantasy, I like horror. I also have written and published a children's book, illustrated a children's book, that I gave away for free, and I've been giving away for free because of the kids being out of school and that kind of thing. And I've been to a couple schools talking to them.
Adam.
Yeah, well, I've been to a couple schools talking to the kids about it and about writing and stuff like that. But one of the cool things, I'm just looking at your page here. Well, not your page, but I guess you could say you're involved with it heavily. The Redbud studio. Like you said, everybody that wants to do it can do it. And to see this kind of quality, and I saw. I mean, I looked at your Amazon page. You have great stuff. But to see this kind of quality, I think when it comes down to, you got to put the work in. You got to, you got to do all the things, and then you also have to learn the trade and the craft, and then be able to apply yourself to it. And I think,
Always. I mean, right. It's like one, the, that old saying about, that kind of creativity is what, 10% inspiration, 90% perspiration.
I think it's
Yeah.
99%
Yeah.
perspiration.
You would be amazed, sometimes when, we're, prior to what's going on in the isolation of the world today. But I mean, my wife and I would be out, socializing and meeting people. And, in a conversation, somebody will, say, well, Ron's a writer. And, it so many times I get people come back and say, oh, I'm going to write a book someday, and
Yeah, I've heard that a million times.
Yeah, because I take that with a grain of salt, because my thought is probably not, because it's not something you talk about before you do it. You have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to put the work in. All right. And, I look back on my career, and there were a lot of setbacks. There were a lot of times that it was frustrating. There were a lot of times where I really wanted to quit.
Oh, you want to talk about frustrating, Ron? Let me tell you, this last Christmas, I was like, oh man, I'm so excited about getting this second book out for Blood Thrasher. And, I put it out. I mean, I just, you know how many copies I've sold?
Uh-oh.
I've only sold a few copies, and, but that's my fault. I mean, like, I look at it like, okay, but it was disappointing. So I took a hard look at what I was doing, Ron. I was like, okay, this is, I got an initial surge from the first book. I got I mean, not a lot of reviews, but I had like 13 reviews, which I feel like for me, it was a pretty good start, but I had a lot of feedback from people. And then, the same folks that I reached out to and said, hey, like, I only know of one person that read the first one, that she read the second one and she loved the second one. I gave away, like I did a little Amazon giveaway. I gave away 55 copies about a month ago. I have had 0 reviews.
Oh.
And I mean, you want to talk about disappointing. I mean, like, you pour your heart and soul and your sweat and your blood and your tears into this, into this work. And you're like, and it's an improvement over the first one, like all this stuff. And then I was like, okay, I messed up. I really messed up here. I've got to look at, what am I doing? Why is this not working? I mean, am I just being a total jerk here? Nobody likes me, or
No. Right.
I mean, like, those are the kind of questions you ask yourself. Like, is it?
No, you do. It's self-doubt comes with the territory.
Right.
There's no doubt about that. All right. I mean, I have no clue how many stories that I've written, in almost what, 47 years of writing.
Wow.
Okay. I've lost track, but the truth of the matter is, I don't ever write a story that I'm doubtful of when I'm finished writing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I've had fun in the last couple of years here in Fort Collins, where we live in Colorado, of creating a night class for writing comics. All right. Because there's a community college here called the Front Range Community College. And they have a continuing adult education program where they have night courses. And I put myself out there a few years ago and heard back from the director, who said, yeah, we'd love to have you come and teach a class here. So it was something that I'd always wanted to do after I graduated from high school, because I was so grateful for the teachers that I'd had in high school and then later in college. And over the years of my writing career, as you say, it's an on-the-job learning experience, the good and the bad, and you accumulate all this experience. And there were times when I said to myself, do I have enough that I could share with other people? There are other people who would want to learn from this. And so ultimately, for the last 2 years, I think I've taught the class 5 times now. It's a 10-week class. It's one night a week.
Oh, wow.
And I've had students from the age of 65 to 13.
I think that is an awesome thing too, Ron, because I try to help other people, and I try to share, and I never do the I keep going back to the shovels and jeans thing, but I never try to give somebody prescriptive advice and saying this is the only way that will work. I can only share what I know works for me.
Well, yeah, right, and you're right. Okay, and obviously that's one of the things that I make it very clear to my students the first night of class is that I'm just basing my teaching, based on experience and what I've learned. What worked for me, it may not work for them, those kind of things. But I try to give them a general feel for the industry itself, for creating the whole concept. And because in the last 15 to 20 years, I've done a lot more prose writing,
Mm-hmm.
I have now the ability of looking at both sides and being able to differentiate the pros and cons of writing comic scripts as opposed to writing a short story or a novel.
I
And
think writing
how,
a comics is a lot like writing a movie script.
well, it is. It's like writing a movie script, and it's like writing a play.
Mm-hmm.
All right, only you have a much larger stage.
Yeah.
That's your imagination. All right, it's not. And it's funny because I actually covered that in my first night of class. In that, when people immediately come back and say, "Oh, it's like a film script," and my answer to that is, well, in some feel, but stop and think what you just said, Adam, because here's the idea. When you're writing a comic script, there is an element that happens in it, all right, which is really weird and bizarre, and it's what I've termed and labeled spatial editing.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay, so understand what I'm saying. Say you're writing a movie script, and in your script you wrote, the hero comes to the door. He hears the girl scream. He pushes open the door. She's being held by the villain across the room. He races across the room, pulls her out of the villain's hand, and punches the villain out. Now, that's probably going to be all of 30, 40 seconds of action.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And guess what? A director will film every bit of those 40 seconds. But try doing that in a comic book.
Yeah, you've only got a couple of panels there.
Right. So you cannot have panel 1, he comes to the door. Panel 2, he hears a scream.
Mm-hmm.
Panel 3, see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna have a comic book that goes 40 pages telling one scene.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you do that? Well, unlike a film script where you can put everything down and let the editors and editors do the directors and editors do their thing, when you're writing a comic script, you're actually editing it in your head.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So again, that's what you just said. He breaks the door down. How many panels do you want to give him before he reaches the villain? And believe me, I have met writers, Adam, who can't do that.
Oh,
All right?
well, yeah, there's a lot of folks that don't have spatial reasoning that way. They can be logical and things like that. But as far as like being able to imagine in another dimension or whatever, Ron, hold that thought because we've got to do the station community announcements. So we'll be back in just about 2 minutes.
You got it.
This is a message from the Georgia State Department of Public Health. There is a State of Georgia hotline people can call with questions or if they think they may have been exposed to the COVID-19 virus. It is 1-844-442-2681. If you believe you're experiencing symptoms of COVID-19 or have been exposed to the novel coronavirus, please contact your primary care doctor, an urgent care clinic, or your local federally qualified healthcare center. Please do not show up at an emergency room or healthcare facility unannounced. More information can be found at dph.georgia.gov. Now you have a chance to support both Savannah Independent Artists and WRUU during this shelter-in-place order to stop the spread of COVID-19. Creatives in Need is a group of independent artists hosted by the Roots Up Gallery, which is collaborating with WRUU during this shelter-in-place to offer an online art gallery at www.rootsupgallery.com. For every work of art sold at this online gallery, the artists receive 80% from the sales and 20% goes to WRUU and its programs like Art on the Air. Interested listeners can go to www.rootsupgallery.com to start shopping today. Voting is now open for Connect Savannah's annual Best of Savannah Readers Poll, and WRUU is once again on the ballot. Last year, you voted us best in the local radio station and talk radio station categories. Continue your support of WRUU 107.5 FM by again voting for us in the Best Local Radio Station and Best Local Talk Radio Station categories. And this year, vote for your favorite WRUU morning program and favorite WRUU host. Voting ends at 11:59 p.m. sharp on Sunday, May 3rd, and results will be revealed the night of Tuesday, May 19th. For details and voting, visit connectsavannah.com. And as always, thank you for listening to, supporting, and voting for WRUU LP Savannah.
All right, we are back, everybody. You're listening to the Adam Messer Show, and I'm your host, Adam Messer. And my special guest today is Ron Fortier, who is a comics guy and a Pulp Fiction guy, editor, a teacher. What else do you do, Ron? You sound like me, man. Like I think I imagine myself, when I'm progress to your age and doing my thing, I'm gonna be like, back in the day, I used to do radio, and I'm gonna be like, and these kids are gonna be like, radio? What in the world? Radio? It was pre, brain insert chips.
Yeah. Oh boy, those days are coming. That's scary, isn't it?
So before the break, we were talking about we were talking about the comic book class, writing comic books, that class that you were talking, that you teach, and talking about spatial reasoning, and talking about the difficulties of being able to write the comic. And then, because it's not just writing, right? It's also you have to be able to paint that picture for your illustrator.
Oh, exactly. I mean, the thing with comics and why I have such an affection for them, unlike this prose writing, novels or short stories, is that it's really a team effort. Mm-hmm. All right, and again, I've actually given workshops to novelists on how to write graphic novels. Okay, whereas trying to make them understand that comics are visual. It's a visual media. And you really have two sensibilities. You have a literate, the writer, and the visual storyteller. But the primary storyteller in any comic book is not the writer, it's the artist. So if you're a writer and you want to get into comics, then my first admonition to you is learn about graphic art. All right, become a fan or meet artists or whatever, because ultimately it's the artist who's going to be the primary storyteller. You write a script and it's pretty much the skeleton, and that's what it is. But a gifted graphic artist is going to take that script and he's going to add the muscle, the veins, the sinew, all that is the body that people look at. So if you have an ego where you're so much in love with your words that's what it's got to be, then, again, like I said, go write a novel or write a short story. And so part of my challenge as a teacher to young writers, adult writers and whatever, who wanted to learn to do comics, was to make them understand that concept, number one, okay? And number two, to realize you really have to be so economic when you write a script, a comic script, because, you look at the average comic page, Adam, all right, and it's X number of panels, okay? Well, in each panel, you're going to obviously have some kind of word balloon. You're obviously going to have some caption, but you're also going to have the picture that the artist is drawing. So when you're writing a script, a writer needs to be aware of the process. A writer needs to understand that when that script is given to an artist, not only does he have the challenge of drawing that image, but he also has to be aware of where captions and balloons will go for the next person down the line. You have the inker, the letterer, the colorist. everybody has to work together for a common goal. If you start getting verbose with your scripts, and then a poor letterer gets your scripts and starts having to cover up all the artwork, then you've blown it. You're really not a part of this team. You don't understand what comics are really all about. So it's much more involved and intricate than I think the average person in public understands to make what is a good comic book.
Oh, I completely agree. It's funny you say that because I look back as a kid myself, looking at the comics, and a couple of my favorite stories were like the X-Men, Phoenix Saga, the Legend of the Dark Knight Returns with Batman, and I'm actually reading Watchmen right now by Alan Moore.
Oh,
yeah,
yeah. Okay.
Well, this is the first time. Don't spoil it. Okay, I hate spoilers. I'll hang the phone up right now, Ron.
No.
The thing is,
somebody asked me one day what I thought was the greatest graphic novel ever written. My answer immediately was The Watchmen. I have so many copies of that, Adam. I have a leather-bound copy.
Wow.
All right? I reread it maybe once a year, and it continuously teaches me new things.
Well, what I wanted to say was so I just picked up, and I'm only through the first book in the graphic novel. Okay, so don't spoil it. Okay, because I will not be your friend anymore if you spoil it for me, because I'm that hardcore about spoilers. But no, just kidding. But okay, so here's something that I like with being an indie, right? Yeah. This is something that I like about looking at the Watchmen, because this is back in the 80s, the early 80s, and the one that I just picked up, it has like this insert of a book, right? So like the guy's dad, and so it's these chapters of this book or whatever, and I was like, okay, so this is something that is different, because the comics that I read as a kid, like the Legend of the Dark Knight, it was a great story. I loved it. Frank Miller, perfect. I loved it. The Phoenix Saga, I love that, right? So I'm reading, and I've always liked Alan Moore stuff. I've always loved Alan Moore stuff. But and Chris Claremont is another one that I've always liked with comics. But what I've noticed too is with some of the newer books, like the House of X and the Powers of X, what they've done is they'll have your storyboard, and you'll have your panels and splash pages and all that stuff. But then they also have like this prose, like you call it or whatever. They'll have these, book pages, basically kind of giving some of the backstory, or, maybe like a sidebar or something like that kind of adds to that. And I think as an indie, like I just picked up G.R.R. Martin's, what is it called? It's like 3 novellas put together. It's like 100 years before Game of Thrones, and I can't think of the guy's name that's the illustrator. But it's a paperback book, and it has all of these like, you remember the King Arthur books back in the day where they had like the the illustrations, little black and white illustrations.
Oh my God, yes.
Okay, so or like the Classics Illustrated type stuff.
Oh, I used to get Classics Illustrated.
So this book has all of these those kinds of illustrations with it, and I just fell in love with it. And I was thinking to myself, okay, if I did something like that, I could do a hybrid, because I am an artist. I can draw. I like to draw. I'm not saying that I'm the best out there, but I like to draw, and I like, and I like black and white. I'm not so much of, I don't do coloring as much. I'm trying to learn that, but I thought about doing something like that with the graphic novel idea that I had, where it would be more of an illustrated book, but I could, I don't necessarily think I'm going to make it into a comic book, but I thought I'd make it into like a graphic, like a graphic novel with illustrations.
Right.
But you're right. I think you're totally right. It is, scripting a comic book is challenging. And then I think one of the things that you hit on that is so important is with a collaboration is the teamwork, because, it's just not any one person is an island. Everybody has to work together. Otherwise you can tell, like, I'll give you a good example. Todd McFarlane co-created Venom, right? So
Yep.
I can't remember the author's name. I can't remember the writer's name. But Todd, when he got the script, he was thinking, and he talked about this in a video not too long ago. He was thinking that Venom was going to be like this kind of like big hulking alien, kind of like the Incredible Hulk or whatever. And then later on, he found out it was actually a guy in a suit, like an alien, symbiote suit,
Right.
And then he
Yep.
said that if he had known that it was going to be like a symbiotic suit, basically, he would have drawn the character differently. And so, that was a mistake that, worked out. Venom became like a super popular character, but if you had a mistake like that didn't catch, it'd be like, well, wait a minute, I told you it was going to be this, or I was, whatever. And, you get people that they have to work together because of, whatever job or contract they have, but that doesn't mean that they work together. And it's really cool. Like I'm looking at your page here.
And again, I'm not telling stories out of school, okay? But I've been in the business long enough that whenever you and I ever hook up at a convention over a beer, I'll tell you some stories.
Well, I was just saying, I'm looking at your Redbud Studios comic page, and you can really tell like you guys gel with the way that you work. I'm even looking, back at like the stuff with your space opera, just scrolling down, and you can see it because it's like the way you're talking about, your stories and all that, and then like with this Mr. Jigsaw, it's funny because it's like
there's
man of a thousand parts.
When it comes to with me, Adam, and when I was a kid and I was reading the comics and wanted to get into that business. I tried my hand at drawing, okay, and realized I have, minimal skills, but I loved the art so much. And the great comic book artists of the days when I was growing up, again, Gil Kane, Jack Kirby, and the great, and realized that there's no way my talent doesn't lie there. My talent lies in the imagination, in storytelling. And so from that point on, what I did was, and what I recommend for all young people to do is I took every English and writing class I could, both in high school and college, to prepare myself to learn that craft of storytelling. But then when the opportunity opened up to work with Gary Cotto that first time, that first real artist that I was working with who has so much talent, all right, I came at our team up with so much respect for what he does. And I've always had that with every artist I've worked with. And that's another thing that I try to get across to my students is that if you're lucky enough to get a job and you're going to be working with a gifted illustrator, graphic artist, then learn who they are. Become their real partner, okay? And learn that it's a give and take process. Inspire them with your scripts and let them inspire you with their artwork. And boy, when the team works, again, that's what we're talking about. That's when you have great comics. And it's my thing is if I've worked on a comic book and it gets put in the hands of a reader, what I want them to do when they finish reading it, but my real goal is, and this is the truth, the gospel truth, is I want them to be satisfied, to be entertained, and say, wow, that was a really good comic, without pointing the finger and saying, well, it was the story, or it was the art, or it was the lettering, or it was the coloring. All right, everybody contributed to that story. I want the reader to feel the story, to say, wow, that was awesome. That's when the team works the way it's supposed to.
I think it's so true with that. Let's do this station ID. You're listening to WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. And you can tell when people are gelling and when they're not. I mean, you can tell when something is disjointed or if it's just hurried, work or whatever, because they're, it's so crazy with the internet. Even when I was a kid, being a comic book artist, I was like, there's no, you have, how do you know? And then like when I graduated high school was when I think Image Comics had started, like 2 years before that, like 92, I graduated like 94. And, it's so weird about how the comic book industry has changed over the years, and it's become more accessible, but there's a lot more competition now, and the big publishers, they're pushing out books, but what I see is when you come to originality and you come to something new and innovative, it's the indies that are doing it. It's not really the big publishers. The big publishers are
Bravo.
regurgitating stuff.
No, bravo. You got it. I mean, here's the truth. As far as I see it, okay, and a lot of my colleagues that have been in the business for quite a few years, ultimately, both Marvel and DC, the top dogs, were bought out. I mean, there was a time when Marvel actually filed bankruptcy. A lot of people don't realize that. There was a time when, and for the most part, and still exists, that these companies never made a profit.
Right.
Okay. DC in the after the boom of the 80s, DC and Marvel were bleeding money. I mean, it was horrible. So ultimately, they get bought out. They get bought out by parent companies like Warner Brothers and eventually Disney, et cetera, et cetera. But they didn't buy them for the comic book. Right. They bought them for the characters.
The movie rights, yeah.
So there you go. So they can make the movies, they can make the toys, they can make, and that's still the case today, Adam. What's happened is they've become just a facet of a giant corporation.
One of the things, though, I have to say, though, is like the comic book movies, like the superhero movies, have become incredibly better. Like the stuff that they had, like if you look at the original, like I don't know,
the made-for-TV stuff in the 70s.
Yeah, but like
no.
But the comic book industry itself.
I'm not dissing any
no,
of that.
no, I'm not saying you are. Well, the comic book industry itself, though, it's suffered a lot. And I mean, like with this whole pandemic thing, even the distribution of it's changed, and but it's nice to see, like for example, looking at your Redbud comics here, or looking at like Randy Bishop's Hawk of New York. It's nice to see, a new character. It's nice to see, like a different story plot, not having the same. I don't know. One of my pet peeves is to see a character book or one of my favorite stories or one of my favorite books have a reboot of number one every 6 months. I can't stand that. And it's like, oh, well, I mean, honestly, I don't read comics that often, but I do get them from time to time. And then it's like, oh, well, we've got number one again. I'm like, wait a minute, I just got number one. I mean, what?
Yeah, and that's what you were calling jeans and stuff, because that's a gimmick. It's just a gimmick.
And it sells books, but the thing is to me, it's like, okay, if they're gonna do like a consecutive series of mini series is what it seems like to me, because they do like a 6-book set, and then they do a graphic novel, and then they do a new 6-book set, and they do a graphic novel, and like that's the whole thing, right? So everybody wants these number ones. And they want all the variant covers, and they want all this, and they want all that, and that's fine. That's cool. Like the main, like the mainstream collector, that's what they want. That's cool. But it also makes it harder for something new to kind of, come around, like, I mean, stuff like you're doing, these pulp comics or whatever. This it's pretty cool. Looking at the artwork, it's just as good as anything that's on the market. I'm sure the writing is too, and but it makes it difficult for indies. And I'm not saying it should be an easy ride. I'm not saying that. For anybody listening, please, no, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is, like, support your indies. And I got a friend of mine. He lives here in Savannah. Actually, him and his wife, they're frequent listeners. They might be listening right now. But Darlene and Terry Dremel, and Terry came up with a comic book called Stee Range Comics back in the 70s. And he did, like his own illustrations, and he did the storyboarding and the writing, all that stuff. Such a cool comic. It's like kind of like Mad Comics back in the day, right?
All right.
And he self-published 6 issues so far. Yeah, 6 issues. And then he did a little kid's story called Dr. Macaroni. And wonderful. I mean, like, it's so... refreshing. I saw it at a record store. I went into this record store called Grayface Records here in Savannah, and I saw it on the counter, and I was like, oh my gosh, let me look at this. And it's printed on 11 by 17 paper, folded in half into a book, staple bound, black and white, little cardstock cover. Just like you talk about fanzines. It's a it's a zine. And man, I loved it. And as a matter of fact, I was like, hey, let me call this guy. Let me see if he'll be interested. I want to talk to him. That's like my MO. Like I see something interesting, I'm like, I'd like to talk with you about that. And so yeah, but it's so cool because guys like him, guys like you, that are still trying to put quality into the writing and the publishing of comics, and and I mean, honestly, we'd all love to be, famous and rich and wealthy from our work. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I don't know anybody. I mean, like, some people are like, oh, I just want to be an artist, whatever. That's fine. But the majority of people were like, man, this is like the dream. It's like, okay, but it's so nice to be able to see something refreshing and new and different.
I mean, Adam, look, this whole idea, all the time that I had this career, from the time, I started selling scripts and started working for various companies, and then started having, nominal successes. Okay. All that time, that 30-year period, the initial 30-year period, what most people don't understand and realize is that I was an employee at a manufacturing factory.
Oh, yeah.
All right, for 31 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And like I like to tell people, I never ever made a living writing. But the factory I worked with came with great benefits. So it took care of me and my family, my kids. We had medical insurance, all that good stuff. Okay. A steady paycheck every week, and it was a hard job. It was a physical, demanding job. What I tell people later, after I retired, was that it paid the bills, but the writing paid my soul.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had to write, and so I maintained both. I maintained that writing career, and I maintained the responsibilities I had as a husband, a father, etc. So here we go. 31 years later, I walk into the plant one day, and they ask me how old I am, how much service I have. And, I'm like, okay, so what's going on? And well, they'd like you up in personnel. You can retire now. And there you go. I had done it. I filled out the paperwork. I was gone. And then from that moment on, the focus and priorities of life were basically living for my family, my kids, my grandkids, traveling, and writing.
That's so
all
awesome,
the writing
Ron.
I want to do.
We've got about a minute left, Ron. Where can people check out your stuff?
Okay. I mean, I have a weekly blog that they can find at www.airship27.com and post every Friday. Go to Amazon, and as you did on the Redbud Studio site, you can go to Amazon and punch my name in, Ron Fortier, and it's going to come up with everything I've done. The most recent that I would direct people to is last year, after being nagged by friends and my wife constantly about all these great stories that I've had and experienced in my career, I actually wrote my memoirs. So there is a book now at Amazon called My Life in Comics, a memoir by Ron Fortier. And I've had some nice reviews. People seem to have enjoyed it. I got to tell you, Adam, life is funny because, I got it published at the end of the last year. I was all ready for convention season this year because I could not wait to have that book on my table. And guess what? No conventions.
I know. Well, Ron, thank you so much for being on the show today. Really enjoyed it. I'll have to have you back on. We'll have to talk comics again. That'd be fun. So,
hey, thank you, Adam. I've actually enjoyed this myself, so it was a privilege. Thank you.
All right, everybody, tune in at the 5 o'clock hour. You'll have Bill Cooper